Imagine ruling the most powerful empire on Earth. Loyal legions at the height of its strength, frontiers stretching for tens of thousands of kilometers, a well-organized state with a booming economy, and the momentum that made it look like you were about to conquer the whole world. And then you decide to stop. You won't expand outwards. You instead solidify what you already have. This was Emperor Hadrian, the man who decided to change the idea of the imperium sine fine, the empire without an end, and instead he turned inwards, making Rome more secure, better run, and more refined. Hadrian left us an incredible numismatic legacy because his coins are very abundant, varied, and they tell the story not just of the emperor, but also of the man, with his unique personality. Often coins can feel like these stiff portraits of an emperor, not revealing much of who that person was, but not for Hadrian. We can actually see the man here. His portraits are among some of the most recognizable in Roman coinage, and there we can see him aging, changing, and presenting different aspects of himself, from a young, fresh soldier to the bearded philosopher, and even the dutiful, often insufferable, perfectionist administrator that he was. So in this video, which frankly only scratches the surface of the vast coinage of this man, I want to show you a few coins issued during his reign, made both by the Mint of Rome and, since he was one of the first emperors to come from the provinces, a few provincial mints as well. You know what? That actually made me curious. What do you think of Hadrian? Some think he was a hero, others a monster. I would love to read what you have to say. Now, where did this man come from? Hadrian was most likely born in the provinces, in Hispania, into a well-connected elite Italian family. After losing his father as a child, he came under the protection of Trajan, who would later become emperor. From there, Hadrian followed the usual path of a rising Roman aristocrat, but with unusual energy. He served in public office and managed entire provinces, and his reputation as a competent soldier landed him many positions of leadership in the Roman army. Despite his fame as a lover of culture and refinement, Hadrian did not shy away from active duty. This man did not stop at one single place. This would be one of the marks of his future time as emperor, of a man who tried being everywhere, both overseeing the army and political affairs. When Trajan died in 117 AD, Hadrian was already 41 years old, so he was very experienced and he understood the dynamics of power quite well. This didn't prevent some turbulence in his early reign. Senators that were close to Trajan claimed the documents he left in his deathbed, passing on the empire to Hadrian, had been forged, and Hadrian, showing his potential to do evil, had to resort to a few purges in order to shut down any opposition. He never had a good relationship with the Senate. We might know him today as this brilliant administrator, that's true, but Hadrian was certainly one of those men who leaned more on his good image amongst the soldiers to gain legitimacy. Which is a good clue for me to show you today's first coin, this denarius here. It was made in Rome in 117, so right after his ascension to emperor. Hadrian spent his entire first year as emperor solidifying his power amongst the soldiers. Instead of going straight to Rome to be validated by the Senate, he wanted to, as I said, solidify the rule with the army first. He went around the Syrian and Danube frontiers, making sure the experienced soldiers saw him and earned their trust, which is quite amazing when we look at this coin in context, because it means that this denarius here was issued at Rome. It was meant to show people there that they had a new emperor. It circulated, but they would only actually see the man a year later. And the kind of imagery that we have here is perfectly aligned to his strategy. We have a young-looking Hadrian. He was known to be quite strong, but it seems like the engraver really went with the make him look young idea here, because despite him being 41, I mean, look at the portrait, he looks 20. Well, what else do we have here? We have a very clear show that he was a man of the army. He's wearing his military cuirass. On many portraits, we have the emperor wearing the cuirass with a cloak on top of it, but here, he just ditched the cloak to make sure people saw him for what he was, a soldier, because we can clearly see his chest piece and even the little fabric flaps falling down his shoulders, showing he was a general and capable of fighting for his right to rule. As for the legends, Hadrian's early coins rely heavily on Trajan's legacy. Apart from his own regnal name, he uses most of Trajan's old titles. So let's read it. Be prepared because it's a mouthful. It reads, Imperator Caesar Trajanus Hadrianus. Hadrian added Trajan's name to his own. Then we have a long list of Trajan's titles, which starts on the obverse and will only end on the reverse. It goes, Optimo Augustus, the best emperor. I wish I had such self-esteem. Germanicus Dacicus, conqueror of the Germans, of the Dacians. So he's making a reference to Trajan's conquests. And then let's go to the reverse. It continues. Partico, so also conqueror of the Parthians. And then after mentioning the Trajan's acumens, he now goes and reinforces once more that he was his adopted son. It goes, Divi Trajanus Augustus Filius, son of the deified Emperor Trajan. And finally, at the very end, he stops leaning on Trajan and mentions his own official titles. Pontifex Maximus, chief priest, Tribunicia Potestate, with tribunician powers, Cos, consul, Pater Patriae, father of the nation. And at the center, we have an image of the Adoptio, Trajan officially acknowledging Hadrian as his son. And so here we have them both standing side by side with Trajan handing a globe representing the world to Hadrian. This kind of scene never happened in real life, but it's a nice allegory to represent the transfer of power. Let me show you another piece from 117 AD to illustrate this earlier portrait style of Hadrian. This one is in higher grade, so just so you can take a better look at the details I just explained. Notice once again the very young looking face of the emperor. Earlier coins will show more of like the emperor's body. Here we can see that like the image goes up to the area of his chest, which actually doesn't leave a whole lot of space for details on his face. Later on, as Hadrian solidified his rule, the portraits will focus more on his face alone, and we will be able to see him better. And quickly going over the reverse of this piece, this one shows a seated image of Concordia. A little bit ironic considering that during this time Hadrian was purging the opposition to his rule, but well, for anyone not involved in power politics, this was indeed a time of concord. It was probably one of the best times to be a Roman, so this design can at least be applicable to most citizens of the empire. So we've established Hadrian was a very active guy. Being a soldier, he must have been used to traveling a lot, being very practical, very hands-on, and more than an active guy, Hadrian was at heart a micromanager. There are plenty of records of him trying to meddle into every minute aspect of imperial administration and army logistics, to the point that he was maybe a little bit insufferable. He tried being everywhere, every time. Most of his reign was spent traveling around the provinces, overseeing every aspect of the Roman state that he wanted to optimize. He had very little tolerance to mistakes. He could become highly aggressive when he saw any kind of inefficiency. And funnily enough, he was self-aware of his annoying nature. After becoming emperor, he developed this habit of sending gifts to most important people he had meetings with, just in case he annoyed them, as a preemptive PR campaign to ensure no one hated him too much. And even coins give us a glimpse of this workaholic side of Hadrian. The Mint of Rome issued a series of coins celebrating his many travels around the empire. These coins show the personifications of the many provinces he visited. Each province had its own little custom image, tailored to the character of the region. Here, for example, on your screen, we have one of such coins. I'm going to start with the reverse of it first, because it's what matters in this case. And here we have an image of Germania. Now, Germania was a frontier region, highly militarized, not very urbanized or refined, very rugged. So, to fit this image, the province is depicted here as a warrior. You can see the province as a woman standing tall, holding a spear, and a shield. Now notice, this shield is not in the shape of the Roman scutum, but instead It's the typical hexagonal shield used by the barbarians across the frontiers, showing this fantastic eye for detail. And as for the obverse, now we have a noticeable change in iconography compared to the previous coin. This piece was struck around the year 133, so towards the end of Hadrian's reign, and, well, this coin was made when he was already firmly established in power. And here we can see the switch to this more personalized portrait. Now the image is more zoomed in on his face, and we can see his more individualized facial features, his beard. You can see like Hadrian broke the tradition of clean-shaven emperors and adopted the Greek custom of having a beard. Some actually say this was not just to emulate the Greek philosophers of old, but also to hide some kind of scar or ugly mark he had on his face. He also seems to have like a fuller face here, like has very plump cheeks. We know that later in life he had problems with water retention, so this might explain this slightly more bloated appearance. As for the legends, since now he didn't have to validate his legitimacy on Trajan so much, what we see here is a much shorter title. It simply reads Hadrianus Augustus Consul Tertium Pater Patria. No more references of like military conquests. He's much more relaxed here, displaying mostly his reputation, his like republican titles like consul and father of the nation. So as we can see, this micromanager attitude of Hadrian shows a style of governance that was quite different. Maybe we could even say that it was the opposite to what was employed by Trajan before him. While Trajan was a hands-off guy, he had an eye for talent, and once he found someone he could trust, he basically gave lots of independence for those working under him. After all, he had wars to win. Hadrian, on the other hand, he looked inwards. So right after becoming emperor, Hadrian, for example, withdrew the troops in Mesopotamia to a more defensible position closer to Syria, considering that the empire had expanded outwards enough, and now it needed to solidify its borders and especially to develop its inner territories and to optimize them. Hadrian optimized, for example, the legal system. He made the interpretation and application of the law more predictable. He issued guidelines, so public officials had clear references on how to govern, how to apply justice, rather than purely relying on personal interpretation. And this mentality of increasing efficiency, of course, also applied to the infrastructure of the empire. During his reign, we can see like a huge number of new public works, new buildings, better infrastructure, better roads. Even the frontier systems were reinforced in order to better maintain the borders and improve tax collection overall. And this next coin we have here summarizes Hadrian's looks inwards very well. This is a denarius from the very end of his reign, between 135 and 138. And here on the reverse, we're going to start with the reverse again, we have a very old native Roman god. Incredibly old, in fact. It predates the first mentions of the more traditional Greco-Roman pantheon that we know about. This is Tellus Mater. Tellus Mater was the Mother Earth. We can see her here standing over a wheat field. The wheat is represented by a couple of wheat stalks to her right. She's also holding agricultural tools. And from the legends, we can read Tellus Stabil, which means something like the stable earth, the firm earth. I think this coin summarizes perfectly what Hadrian wanted to accomplish, what he really wanted to leave as his legacy. This gaze turned inwards to make the empire, first of all, safe for people inside of it. After all, this was the key. This way people could focus on actually building things and working, rather than having to constantly prepare for the next war or the next raid. The obverse of this denarius is in better grade compared to the previous coin, so we can see here a little bit better the small details on Hadrian's portrait. And we can clearly see, once again, like his jowly portrait, with the final little details on the beard, his curly hair. Everything just really mimics incredibly well his real appearance. If you had the chance of seeing one of his marble busts, it's really remarkable. Portraiture art became incredibly incredibly impressive during the 2nd century, and I think Hadrian's time in particular was a high point for visual accuracy. If we go to other denominations, we see this consistency on the quality. For example, here in the sestertius, massive coin, 24 grams. If you collect Roman coins, I would encourage you to have at least one sestertius in your collection. Like even one in a humble state like this one. This one has had some noticeable corrosion damage on its surface, but it's still a super nice portrait. And this gigantic flan really allows you to zoom in and take a closer look at every single detail in his face. And the same goes for the reverse. This is actually a very common reverse type. We have Felicitas here, so it's not a particularly complex image, but even here we can see like the folds on her clothing and everything looks very sculptural. These coins, a sestertius really looks like a sculpture in miniature. Another key aspect of Hadrian's reign was his passion for Greek culture, and not in a shallow or decorative way. He admired Hellenism in general, and especially the Greek way of conducting public life, in which the ruler was expected to be more accessible, more visible, and more directly engaged with his fellow countrymen. More conservative Roman senators actually mocked him, giving him the nickname Graeculus, the Little Greek. In many elite circles, there was still the idea that a proper Roman should be austere, practical, disciplined, and the Greeks, with their Eastern influences, were seen as soft, luxurious, even effeminate, which for them explained their fall for the Romans. They were inferior men. Now, regardless of what the senators thought of Hadrian, he still clearly saw himself as one of Plato's philosopher kings, surrounding himself with intellectuals, specialists, and experts in the art of good government. This supposedly austere, logical way of ruling actually did not always fit easily with Hadrian's own very passionate nature, but I think this more philosophical ideal of government certainly acted as a brake on his worst impulses, helping produce a reign that, at least in the everyday works of administration, was very successful. And to illustrate Hadrian's Hellenism, it's just right that we show one of his Greek coins. I know it sounds kind of weird talking about a Greek coin coming from a Roman emperor, but what we have here is a tetradrachma of Egypt. Now these, as you can see, these quite chunky silver coins, they illustrate one of the fascinating realities about the Roman Empire, because despite there being a certain level of globalization within the imperial territories, and I use globalization here with a million quotes because it's not like the kind of globalization we have today. So if you imagine yourself as a Roman citizen of the time, you could technically go from one corner of the empire to the other and navigate life at your final destination. But it wasn't really that simple. You might have been a Roman citizen and this afforded you full citizenship rights, but if you went to a place, local institutions would be different, languages would be different, networks of trust were generally very localized. There was very little in regards to legal protections that universally applied to everyone. And as we can see from this coin, which is very different to anything that we've seen in this video, coins were also different in this Greek area of the empire. And certain areas, like Egypt, where this coin was made, they had entirely separate monetary standards, inherited from the old Greek kingdoms that were dominated by the Romans. Sometimes the denarii that we saw previously, those made at Rome, they also circulated alongside local denominations, but in other occasions, such as Egypt, they actually did not. Egypt was essentially like a separate kingdom with many like unique institutions and its own money, even if it was under Rome's control and it was one of its provinces. I guess that's simply a fruit of the fact distances were so vast and information couldn't go as far, so life just ended up being more local, even if the empire was an overarching commanding institution. That makes us understand why Hadrian, such a micromanager, decided to go everywhere and see everything. He probably couldn't stand the idea of not seeing and handling with his own hands his empire in these distant lands. He just had to go everywhere and see what he was managing. So looking at this coin in more detail, we have this portrait of Hadrian here, looking to the left. It's all rather typical for the coinage of his reign, but if you look closer, you can notice that the style is different. This is not the fruit of a dying graver from the Mint of Rome. This comes from the Mint of Alexandria, so it's made in its own local style, and of course the legends are in Greek, reflecting an adaptation to the local people. It reads Autokratoros Kaisaros Trajanos Hadrianos Sebastos, so Imperator Caesar Trajanus Hadrianus Augustus. It's nearly a word-to-word translation, but in Greek, showing us this international nature of the Roman Empire. But then we go to the reverse and we have a complete shift. Now, this is really cool. Here, it really shows that the empire held tons of different cultures. What we have here is not a Roman god. And this is also not a purely Greek god. This is a mixed deity between traditional Egyptian gods and Greek gods, brought to Egypt not by the Romans but by the Ptolemies, who ruled these lands centuries before the arrival of the Romans. Here we have Hermanubis, so a mix between the god of commerce and communication, the Greek one, Hermes, which we can see standing here, holding a palm branch and a kerykeion, and to his left, close to his feet, we have a jackal, which represented the old native Egyptian god from Anubis. You won't find these kinds of gods anywhere else in the coinage of the empire, in the same way that other regions, such as Syria for example, would have their own art style that illustrated the culture of that region. Even the legends here are very local in nature. It's so fantastic. So what we have here is a written form of the regnal year of the emperor. It translates to something like in the 19th year. So it counts like the years of Hadrian's reign in a way similar to what they would do with the Greek kings. And such a thing would be unthinkable in a Roman coin, because back in Italy, the Romans did not like the idea of being ruled by a king. So they counted these quote-unquote regnal years of the emperor more in the sense of republican years served under a series of different official state positions. But a regnal year, like a proper king, for the Greeks this was completely normal, but for the Romans, oh no, you wouldn't see that on a Roman coin. And it's fascinating to see this split view of the image of the emperor depending on the region where the coin was made. So let's keep going, and next let's mention one of Hadrian's most turbulent moments of his reign. Now, he might have wanted his time to be a peaceful one, but the emperor had to fight in wars. In particular, a very violent uprising in Judea, orchestrated by a man called Simon Bar Kokhba in the 130s. Hadrian tried to Romanize the region of Judea during his reign, probably part of his empire-wide consolidation efforts that we've already discussed. And that included reshaping the province of Judea in Roman fashion, creating a new capital, Aelia Capitolina, in Roman style, placing there new temples in Roman style, featuring of course statues of Roman gods, issuing coins in Roman style and with images of living people, which essentially stamped out the hopes of the local Jews of reconstituting their temple and reclaiming any independence they wanted to have. Basically, they saw their homeland being transformed into a Roman province. Now, Hadrian's Romanization efforts basically, well, they ticked every single box in the list of things that made the Jewish population very angry. And this led to a massive revolt in which the Jewish rebels massacred the local Roman populations. And Hadrian answered in kind by sending 12 legions and basically genociding the locals, so thoroughly that the province was left nearly uninhabited. Which leads me to this humble little coin here. This is a small bronze assarion, and it illustrates quite well some of the policies enacted by Hadrian that probably led to this revolt. Now, this is a civic coin, a coin issued to serve as small change in a particular city, in this case Tiberias in Galilee, and for a Roman living in Tiberias, this coin was, of course, perfectly normal. But for the Jews of the area, this was definitely not okay. First of all, on the obverse, we have the representation of a living person on a coin, which was forbidden by their religion. We have the bust of Hadrian here on the obverse with the titles written in Greek, claiming he was the leader of this region. And as we head to the reverse, we have a Roman temple with, at the center, you can see an image of a seated Jupiter. Once again, a Roman god inside of it. Absolutely not a pleasant sight for the local Jewish population. And this coin actually served as a Roman propaganda campaign meant to circulate in the region. There are records of the construction of a temple during the time of Hadrian in Tiberias, the temple was actually never concluded. So this coin effectively serves as this propaganda to the local population of what was going to be built in the city. For a Roman local, this might have sounded great, like, oh, look how nice of our emperor, he's bringing Tiberias into the larger Roman world. We're even going to have our own temple to our gods, even here in tiny distant Galilee. We know that this coin was meant to be used in Tiberias because the legend reads the name of the city, so we have Tiberias Claudiopolis, the official name of the city at the time. And another tiny but interesting detail on this reverse, at the very bottom we have a written date which coincides with the year 120 AD, precisely the year in which the construction of this temple was said to have started, making this humble little coin here a direct evidence to the record of the offenses, intentional or not, committed by Hadrian. So fascinating. Despite Judea being a minor province, the displacement of, 12 legions must have called people's attention back in Rome. So Hadrian's coinage in Rome, it doesn't explicitly celebrate in any way his crushing of the rebellion, but we can actually notice a subtle shift in the tone of certain coins. Before the revolt, most of Hadrian's coins, from the middle of his reign, were quite relaxed in nature, but between 134 and 138, at the end of his reign and when the revolt happened, we start seeing again some military symbology showing up. So, for example, in this denarius, the emperor is once again wearing a cuirass. And he's not covering it with some kind of cloak. You can actually see the pieces of plate armor covering his chest and his shoulders. He's still quite dignified here. It's not a coin that advertises, hey everyone, we're at war, get your swords out. It's more like, hey, you might have heard that there are disturbances at the frontiers, but as you can see here, your emperor is ready to take care of the problem, which in fact he did. Hadrian oversaw at least the initial stages of the campaign. And we have a continuation of this message on the reverse. The Romans here are giving thanks to Fortuna for protecting the emperor on his way to Judea and for his safe return to Rome. Here we have Fortuna Reduci, so the fortuna of the safe returns. It's a very well thought out message. It's something like, okay, the emperor has taken care of the situation, he went there, dealt with it, and came back safely. So you, good Roman citizen looking at this coin, rest assured that we, Romans, have the favor of the gods because our emperor is safe and sound. And you know what? I know this video is about Hadrian, but it's not just about coins of Hadrian, in fact. During his reign, a series of other characters show up on his coinage. Some coins of these characters are actually relatively common and easy to find and collect, while others are major rarities. During the early years of his reign, as we've discussed before, he relied a lot on the legitimacy that was given to him by Trajan, so his predecessor ends up being a common sight on his coins as well. But not only Trajan, actually we have the wife of Trajan as well, Plotina, who served as a maternal figure for Hadrian during most of his life. There are actually even letters from Hadrian in which he refers to Plotina as his most revered mother, as well as his mother-in-law, Matidia, who Hadrian also had a very close relationship with. So we have at least 3 members of the previous imperial family showing up on Hadrian's coins. And now, since I just mentioned Hadrian's mother-in-law, that leads us to Hadrian's wife, Sabina, who we can see on this denarius that you can see here. Now, Sabina and Hadrian, well, they didn't have a very happy couple life together. In fact, they were openly hostile to one another, and their marriage was purely a political one. On one hand, it seems like both of them had a very strong temperament, so they didn't get along very well, and add to that the fact that Hadrian was homosexual and he showed basically no interest in Sabina, so it wasn't a surprise that no children came from this marriage. There are even some surviving records of the kinds of nasty things they said about each other publicly. On one hand, Hadrian said that, quote, "If I was a private citizen, I would have divorced this creature long ago," while Sabina herself, commenting on why she didn't have any children with Hadrian, she openly claimed that any offspring from this monster would be a danger to the human race. Yikes. Hadrian's tender little heart had another owner. It wasn't Sabina. It was a young man from Bithynia called Antinous. Hadrian was completely in love with the young man, and he took him everywhere he went. Sadly for Hadrian, tragedy would strike during one of their expeditions to Egypt, where Antinous drowned in the Nile under very suspicious circumstances. Hadrian was struck by sadness and immediately deified him. He went more than that. He founded cities on Antinous' name, struck a large number of coins with his image, and the number of statues featuring him is also massive, showing that Hadrian simply adored the young man. Sadly, their love story didn't last very long. Apart from Antinous, 2 other men show up on Hadrian's coinage, both of his successors. These are actually the easiest to find alongside the coins of Sabina. So as Hadrian saw himself getting older, he picked one of his close friends, Lucius Aelius, who we can see here in this denarius as his first successor. He even elevated him to the position of Caesar, but sadly, the choice was a very poor one, because when he was elevated as his official successor, Aelius was already suffering from a terminal case of tuberculosis, and he died before Hadrian did. And this led to the emperor having to pick another successor. So he ended up choosing a well-renowned senator, the future Antoninus Pius, which we can see here with his previous name, Titus Aelius Antoninus, but only under the conditions that in order to become emperor, he first had to adopt 2 young men, Aelius' son, the boy who would become the emperor Lucius Verus, and the man who Hadrian really wanted to succeed him, a young and promising Marcus Aurelius. Yes, the future emperor Marcus Aurelius, who was maybe a little bit too young by then to handle the pressures of assuming command of the empire. Hadrian probably thought that Antoninus wouldn't last very long, just long enough for young Marcus to grow and learn with him, but it turns out that Antoninus reigned for some glorious 23 years, in which Marcus had plenty of time to learn everything about being a good ruler. Finally, in the 10th of July, 138 AD, Hadrian died, after 21 years of a very successful reign. Not a perfect one. His personal instability certainly caused a fair share of problems, especially with his very turbulent relationship with the Senate, but for the average Roman on the streets trying to just make a living, Hadrian was absolutely fantastic. He reigned over a period of not only lots of relative peace, certainly peaceful in the context of the ancient world, and he managed to develop the insides of the empire. He left most of the provinces in pretty good shape. The senators, of course, wanted to damn the memory of Hadrian, but after much insistence from Antoninus, Hadrian was finally deified by the Senate. And considering the very small number of coins celebrating his deification, it seems like the Senate was like, okay, Antoninus, we're gonna deify him, but we're gonna make the bare minimum of coins celebrating it. Don't push us. And as we can see in this rather rare denarius, we have a portrait of Hadrian with the laurel crown, which I find kind of unique. Generally, the portrait of dead emperors, they don't wear any piece of headgear to show they were not ruling the empire anymore. But here, it seems like they've broken protocol because we have the laurel crown. We also have some very simple legends. Divus Hadrianus Augustus, proclaiming his new status as a god. And as for the reverse, we have the main symbol of Jupiter, the eagle, which was said to carry the soul of the dead emperor to heavens. During the public cremation ceremony for the emperor, an eagle was also released to symbolize this process. And apart from the eagle, we have some very simple legends. Consecratio, so consecrated, reaffirming Hadrian had been officially approved as a god by the Roman Senate. And there we have it, Hadrian, the third of the 5 good emperors. I would actually love to read what you have to say about Hadrian in the comment section of this video. And, you know what? If you enjoyed this period of Roman history, I have a nice suggestion of the next video you should watch. This video shows a set of coins of the 5 good emperors, an interesting mini collection of Roman coins that I highly recommend you try to assemble, in which Hadrian is a part of. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Leave a like if you did. Happy collecting, and I'll see you soon. Let me give a special thank you to all of my amazing channel members and Patreons for their generous support. This channel would not be the same without your help. And if you would like to be part of this list, have early access to my videos when they are uploaded to YouTube, and a series of other perks, make sure to check out my Patreon page and my members tab on YouTube. Thank you very much.